Um, Hello everyone, this is Emmanuel from European Business Angels Network. On behalf of EBAN, I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar. During this webinar, you will hear from our experts insights on tech funding. To tackle the topic, we are very happy to have on board one of our active EBAN Space Executive Committee member, Uli Fricke, that is CEO of FunderNation, Germany's only crowd investment platform that is run by a team of investment professionals. And she's also one of the founder and CEO of Triangle Venture Capital Group, one of the Europe's leading investor high-tech startup companies. So before starting this webinar, a few rules. Please keep your webcam switched off and your microphone muted. So this will help us for reducing transfer of data. And use the chat to write your questions. We will tackle them at the end of this Uli's presentation. The webinar will be recorded and will be shared with EBAN communities later on.
I think it's also important to point out that Uli was also the president of the what is today Invest Europe, but was then the European Venture Capital Association. So it really combines, VC with angel investing with entrepreneurship. So we are very lucky to have her today.
Thank you so much, Candice. Emanuele, if it's okay, I'll take it up from here.
Yes, absolutely. I stop sharing my screen. You can
share mine.
Yes, we can see it properly.
Okay, great. So welcome everybody. It's wonderful to be here today and to talk about the myth and reality of tech funding. So I'm Uli Fricke. I have already been introduced a little bit. I'm an entrepreneur actually in my own rights, and one of the founders of Triangle Venture Capital Group, which we started 22 years ago. I have since been involved in funding of research spin-off and high-tech companies in different industries and different stages of their development through both venture capital, work closely with business angel, and also money from private individuals organized through crowdfunding. So tech funding has been my passion in the last 22 years, and the webinar today is actually trying to share some of those experiences that I made in that period of time with the community of tech entrepreneurs. So I have a couple of theses that I often come across when talking to people that think about tech funding, and I wanted to deal with those theses. So one is about what is the best framework, the best context for a successful tech startup company. So is it that you know each other really well? That you're best friends and best buddies, you have a lot of fun with each other, and you've already gone through a number of things together. Is that the best framework? Actually, trust tends to be a super big reason for a successful joint entrepreneurial undertaking. But what does that mean, trust? Trust means potentially that you're very good buddies, but trust potentially also means that you have realized something together, gone through difficulties with each other. If I'm talking to a group of founders that are a research spin-off, maybe you have jointly encountered challenges in your research work that you needed to fix, and observing how your partner dealt with the challenge, that is what creates trust. So in reality, actually, it's the people factor is super important, but because everything is in the execution, not as much in the idea, this trust factor is so important. And trust in knowing that your partners in the business will do whatever is necessary to turn your great idea, your cool idea, into something that is actually operationally successful. Because at the end of the day, no matter how great the idea, if it's not executed well, nobody will know it. Look at something like MP3. What makes, I mean, we all know MP3. There have been many MP3 players on the market. Eventually, one succeeded. And what made it so successful? It was the energy and the absolute desire to do it well. And to have people that can execute it well, that can convince from a content perspective. They know what they're talking about. They can talk with passion about what they want to do. They have a focus on doing it well, and they can convey that message. So it's actually really more about doing things well and being convincing about this doing things well. And from an investor's perspective, on top of that, and that's the challenge, because we're looking for really great people that know already a lot, but that can also accept that there's things still to be learned. And I have to concede, when I was 25 and I was in the middle of my first own company, I thought I know everything. Now, many years later, I have to recognize that there's still a lot to learn. And so that's an ongoing venture in itself. And if entrepreneurs get that, if investors get that sense that entrepreneurs on one side have experience, on the other are still willing to learn, that's a great plus from an investor's perspective. So people factor, one important aspect. Next myth. Big money means big success. The more money that has been invested, the more you can achieve, right? Isn't that so? Well, I have been observing over more than 2 decades now companies with similar areas of technology in similar industries with different levels of funding. And actually, it's not always the case that more money means more success. I've been investing in artificial intelligence, for example, in a US-based company that received $30 million US in venture capital. And I have been investing at the same time in a European-based startup dealing with a very similar technology, addressing a similar market of, at that point in time, creating smart bots for the first wave of excitement in the internet about having chatbots. The German company actually received 3 million euros compared to the 30 million US dollars of the American company. And guess how the development shaped? The German company generated 6 million euros in revenues, and the American company generated 6 million US dollars in revenues in about the same time frame. So what happened? Of course, the European company was much more successful with the money they received, because with 1/10 of the money they created the same outcome. And it was a very good example of, if there is at a very early stage a lot of money available, sometimes companies tend to invest in expensive experiments, but they create very often the same outcome as smart experiments. So big money does not equal big success. Fairly difficult to buy markets, even with the biggest marketing budgets. If technology is not yet fully proven, or if as a startup we still need to figure out what really is the best possible solution to solve the problem of our customers, then we can spend a lot of money on marketing and still not be successful in the market. So when I started my first business, my then senior partner said something which stuck with me. And he said, creep before you walk and walk before you run. So show on a smaller scale how to make something work. And then it's show that you have a first customer that really likes what you do, that is willing to spend money on the product or solution that is offered, and then take it from there and start to invest bigger amounts of money in a scale up. Number 3, and that's actually something we tend to discuss a lot, sometimes with entrepreneurs, often with other investors, very often with people that think about venture capital without being really involved. And the perspective is, once I have an investment in my startup, I can try to do things well. The investors will support me and they will help me to be successful. And the goal is that I can do what I think is good for me. Well, the reality is actually really different, because to be an entrepreneur is actually hard work. And yes, it is a lot of fun. And you have much more control over your life, over what you do, than if you are an employee in a large company. But it's important to understand and figure out in the beginning that you have to stick with it. It's not okay to give up as an entrepreneur, no matter how difficult it is, and no matter how many people will tell you it's not going to work. It's not an option to give up. The strongest survive, the most persistent will be successful. And once you have investors on board, no matter whether that's business angel investors or VC investors, then it becomes even more tough, because your investors would want you to succeed and really scale and be successful with their money. And VC investors have 4 to 8 years to help you be successful. So time is short. So the work week will be even longer than it was before. And at the end of the day, from an investor perspective, it's money. It's money that rules the world. So what investors would want to see, and that's when I say only the strongest do survive, what investors want to see is that with the money from the investor, you're able to convince customers to pay for your services or products. Investors get actually really unhappy if companies keep knocking on the door of investors rather than trying to find customers. And it's actually, it sounds counterintuitive, but it is really true that it's easier, once you have an investor on board, to knock on the investor's door and ask for more money than to find customers who pay for your services offered. And that's something companies really, really should keep in mind. Actually, I had a portfolio company where I could not reconcile, being a member of the board of directors, the fact that the company was generating nice revenues and it was approaching an operational break-even on a quarterly basis. But still, the CEO kept knocking on our door for more money, more money, more money from the investors. And even though we spent quite some time trying to understand the company, we needed to get down to the review of their cash management system to understand that they send invoices to the customers, that they, of course, put those invoices into their profit and loss statement, so they had nice revenues, but then they never wanted to ask the customers to pay those invoices. So while there were revenues, there was no cash inflow from those revenues. And it actually hadn't dawned on me before that a company might forget to do that. So they found it easier to call on the investors for more investment than to call on their customers to pay their bills, which is actually not good for the relationship with the investor on one side, but it's also too sad for the company, because the most rewarding event in any startup is to have paying customers. It's the best proof that you can get that you're doing the right thing, that you're solving a real problem, that you're helping somebody to get a good service or use a great product. And it's the number one confirmation that you're on the right track. And I've seen this in so many startup companies. The moment you have paying customers and you get that payment onto your bank account for the whole team, it changes life completely. And it's a huge missed opportunity to forget to look after that part of the business. So only the strongest survive, only those that execute well, that find paying customers. And actually, that makes life as an entrepreneur fairly simple. It's straightforward. Bottom line, we have to find paying customers. But that's not, life is not fair. Fairness is not necessarily part of that equation. Actually, what I'd like to say is that we don't get what we deserve, we get what we negotiate. And that's true, actually, by the way, for both our relationship with investors, or relationship between investors and companies, no matter if we talk business angels or venture capital investors. But that's also true for our relationships as a company with our customers. We get what we negotiate, not what we deserve. Another myth I have to often counter: seed funding equals trial and error. Now that we have the first money, we can try to figure out how to find the best technical solution. And after a number of rounds of trial and error, we'll find the right solution. And that might be easier or potentially perceivable in a software company, but the moment we deal with something a bit more sophisticated on the technology side than software, that approach is doomed to failure. So I had another company. It's actually one of my most successful investments ever at the end of the day. But in the beginning, this company, a medical device company, was called 2010 Perfect Vision. They created a new machine for laser eye surgery that used a completely super innovative technical process and a new laser source. They received 1 million in seed money from us. And then they went into a trial and error phase, which they completed after another 10 million, out of which 7 of those 10 million were actually unexpected and not part of the original plan, which meant that out of 3 original founders, only 1 was still in the company after the next 9 million. So we managed to sell that company for €500 million to Bausch & Lomb. So at the end of the day, it was a big European success story in 2012. It could have been even more successful also for all of the entrepreneurs and all of the investors involved if that trial and error phase wouldn't have been so long and so expensive. That would have made it potentially not necessary to have a new CTO and a new head of sales at a very early stage of the company's life. So actually, in venture capital terms, the reality is not trial and error. The reality is actually succeed or out, because that company I just talked about, 2010 Perfect Vision, they were lucky that they had a very strong founder and a very, very strong technical capability. Many companies, if they exceed their R&D budget tenfold, they just don't succeed because they will get no more subsequent funding. Because in reality, investors, we protect ourselves in order to make sure that companies deliver. And that starts with the fact that if we, in our VC fund, if we commit 5 million to a company, we would never pay 5 million on the day of signing the agreement. We'll have milestones. So the money is paid in tranches, and the later tranches depend on milestones. So the company has to achieve ambitious milestones, very often both technically and commercially. And that makes it necessary to step by step create little and often interim but successes, so that the investors get the confidence that the team and the company can deliver. So some fairly mundane things like project management becomes an important task in a tech startup, including things like a second source strategy. If you need, as part of your product that you're building, if you need to source in certain pieces of hardware, and that's super innovative and only has a few potential suppliers, it's really important to build a second source strategy from the beginning, to not get stuck if one of those suppliers can't deliver. Because investors cannot afford, VC investors maybe more so than business angels, but in principle, all investors cannot afford to be patient. We need to show returns to our own investors in our venture capital funds. And in order to be able to generate that return, we have a limited time frame, which makes us fairly impatient, super supportive, but not patient. The next myth on the table is, if I have a great idea and the business plan and venture capital, then by determination, I will build the next Google. Everything that's necessary for success is a great idea, and the best idea will be successful at the end of the day. Well, history has shown in many, many, many cases before that it's not the best idea, and also not the best technology that eventually will win out. It's the best execution. It's the hard work that takes into consideration what makes a great solution, how to make life easy for the customer, how to find the niche where I'm solving a real relevant problem for my potential customers. And here, this is really about doing the right things and about doing them well. But talking about doing, we also have to talk about talking. I have the very interesting discussion with a lot of tech entrepreneurs, and especially in their early phases of starting their companies. Tech entrepreneurs that are worried to talk about their ideas because they are afraid that somebody might steal the idea and run with it and be successful. And I have never seen that happen in the past, that only because somebody talked about an idea, somebody else took it and turned it into a successful undertaking. At the same time, to not talk about the idea is a big mistake, because we only get the relevant feedback that we need from potential customers, from the market, from people that might use our product or service if we talk about it. And we need to take up that feedback, because no matter how smart we are, no matter how great our technology, we need to take the actual feedback from the market into consideration in order to create the most successful, best possible product. The customer perspective, including ease of use, is absolutely key. It's also key to understand the language of our customers and to be able to hear what they say. And talking about our idea also creates visibility. And this is something that no startup can ever underestimate, that it is very important that people hear about us, learn about us, and start to get comfort with our key messages. So, bottom line, execution is about doing. It is about getting our idea out there. And by the way, execution, we either do 100% or it's not happening. So, one more myth. Negotiate agreements. To the last dot. I have been negotiating investment contracts with entrepreneurs that were so busy weeding out typos in the contract, making sure that every colon is where it should be, that I'm afraid they did not really focus on the content of their contract. So 3 years later, when I was about to execute some of the rights the contract granted me, these entrepreneurs were shocked, because they were so focused on typos in the contract that they didn't think enough about the content and its consequences. And the investment contracts actually tend to have a certain degree of complexity, and that's fine with the first contract. Maybe that's easy enough to understand. For sure, that's easy enough to understand. But in a tech startup, typically over 4, 5, 6 years, there will be a number of funding rounds. And in those different funding rounds, what happens is with each funding round, there is a new contract. And the clauses in the latest contract might have an impact of what clauses in the earlier contracts mean. And it's important to not lose these things out of sight. And that's not a theoretical concept I'm talking about. Actually, the company I mentioned earlier, 2010 Perfect Vision, which we sold to Bausch & Lomb, after 10 years and 7 funding rounds, we had 28 binders with contracts. And at the end of the day, even the lawyers were close to throwing in the towel, trying to interpret things. So these things get complex, and therefore it's really important when you negotiate an investment agreement or contracts with investors, concentrate on your important goals. And I would always recommend a step-by-step approach. First step, agree on a term sheet. And in the term sheet, we fix in normal language, in normal English or French or Spanish or German, without the help of lawyers, we fix the key framework on which we agree on an economical basis. How much money is being invested, for which valuation, what are the special rights and privileges that the investors need, are there any special rights and privileges that the founders get. This is a couple of page document that helps us to focus on the content and which are the joint goals that we have. once this term sheet is agreed, then we have actually negotiated the basic economic terms, then we can give that term sheet to lawyers. And here is another experience, and interesting enough, I was thinking that this might change with the years, but it's not really changing. I'm fully aware that founders, of course, need to preserve cash because cash is not always there. But it's still super important that when giving those contracts to lawyers, the founders also have legal support, and legal support by somebody who understands the contractual framework of investment contracts, because that's very special contract wording, which if lawyers are not experienced in it, they will waste a lot of your time and spend a lot of your money trying to figure these things out. An unexperienced lawyer most likely costs less than an experienced lawyer who deals with these kind of investment contracts, but he will take 5 times the amount of hours necessary. And then it's also important to recognize that certain things are, for business angel and VC investors, really prerequisites for investing. So to try to completely get rid of them through the negotiation is probably a time-consuming undertaking that does not have much chance of success. Things like liquidation preferences, anti-dilution protection, and exit trigger rights every VC will need to have. So while details can be negotiated, you probably save a lot of energy if you don't try to completely eliminate them. So then, actually my last myth in this little presentation is VCs are nice people. And you, of course, don't have the benefit of seeing me in front of you. But it's a very nice image that we have of ourselves as VC investors. We're friendly people. We smile with our entrepreneurs. We are supportive and have patience. We help with finding solutions. And we understand if things don't go exactly the way they should be, because that is the reason why we gave money to a company. Well, actually, in reality, life is a little different. It's a nice image that we have of ourselves, but our reality is that we invest money of other people as VC investors. We have money from pension funds, insurance companies, wealthy individuals, and they expect us to be successful with their money. And they want that we triple their money within a time frame of 5 to 9 years. Which means, bottom line, we have to be really making sure that the companies in our portfolio perform. We cannot afford to have time, and we cannot afford to be super tolerant about mistakes. Of course, we are supportive. Of course, we help with tech knowledge. We help with access to funding. We help with access to potential customers. We spend a lot of time with the companies in trying to be a motivating, positive sparring partner. But patience is something that is not our strength. We'll be pushing the company to ramp up quickly, and we'll have the rights to act if things don't work out the way we think is a successful path. So what does that mean for an entrepreneur in the interaction with your investors, no matter if VCs or business angel? Actually, really the starting point and the end point is trust again. This is actually also where we started with this presentation, right? trust is the key asset that enables a strong relationship. And if there is trust, if we trust the entrepreneur, then we are also a bit more patient than if we think we're not being told everything, we have no transparency, we don't understand what's going on. So venture capital is, of course, a great way to fund a business. If it fits, it's a perfect funding form. It does not fit every company, and it for sure does not fit every entrepreneur, because you have to accept the VC as a strong partner who will have a voice in the development, in the strategic perspective of the company. And as an entrepreneur also will have to accept that if we have a VC and business angel investor, the company really has to scale in 4 to 6 years, and the company at the end of that period will be sold or IPO'd, because that's how we generate the returns for our investors. That means, if I take the opposite perspective, for a founder who wants to build a business and hold on to it for himself, his lifetime, and the next generation, venture capital might not be the perfect funding strategy for that business. For an entrepreneur who really cannot accept that anybody else has a say in the business, venture capital might not be the perfect funding strategy. But where it fits, it's an accelerator that helps the company big time. So let me quickly conclude that in my last 22 years as a tech investor, I have seen that great ideas are everywhere. Traditional investors aren't. That's why business angels, venture capital investors, and other sources of funding are so important. And at the moment is actually a great time for entrepreneurs, because there's so many sources for funding that are available to us. There is grants, there is always the capability of bootstrapping, of finding friends and family and potentially generating early revenues, and therefore need external funding either at a later stage of the company life, or potentially even not at all. There's crowdfunding, there's business angels, there's venture capital. For companies that already generate cash flows, there's bank financing. So there is many sources of capital, and there are many roads to success. So currently, I believe the overall climate for entrepreneurs is super positive. So don't listen to people that tell you it will not work. Don't let anybody stop you. Actually, almost everybody can tell us entrepreneurs why our idea would not work, but we are the only one who can make it happen, and we can do it. Times are great, so the most important thing at the end, don't forget to have fun while doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uli. Thank you very much. This is very, very, very interesting. Okay, now it's time for questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand or write in the chat and let me know. Before...
Emanuele,
yes?
do you want the screen back?
No, maybe you can keep your... Oh, you don't have a lot of text, but probably if you need to move from your slides, I don't know.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see. My question for you, Uli, just to start, and what if this trust, you said the trust is the most important thing in the team, and very often we have team composed by friends, and as you said, it doesn't mean necessarily that they can trust to each other when to deliver and they have enough skills or competences to deliver. So what is do you have suggestions if there is a lack of trust, or how we can recognize this lack in the team?
Yeah, the reason why I'm saying this, and I put this at the beginning of my presentation, is that I see, and I have seen many founder teams that after the first couple of years are a bit disappointed with each other because they started off as great friends and they do not turn out to be the best business associates. So when starting a business, it would help to think about, have we gone through difficult times with these people, and how did we work as a team then? And if we have gone through difficult times before, even though we are best buddies, but we solved a technical issue at university or what have you, that's a good indication that we have a good basis. We have seen each other in times of crisis, quote unquote, and that's a good starting point for trust. Another aspect is that, and for me that was a super big learning in my own professional environment. Typically we look for people that are similar to ourselves, because we think that we very much appreciate our own strength, and if we find them in others, we think they are strong people as well. Now, for example, I'm obviously a fairly extroverted person, and I like to understand the big picture, and I'm by nature more a business development big picture person than a detailed focused person. I needed to learn that for me it's super important to have in my team people that look at the details and that really want to figure out the details before they come up with a conclusion or a solution. And intrinsically, from my nature, that it's not intuitive to me that this is a strength. So I needed to learn that people that are really different from me have super important strength that they bring to the table, and I needed to learn to appreciate this. That's another way to look at the people that you build your team with. Not lose patience with these people, which would be my natural behavior, but appreciate that they spend time to understand the detail. They ask questions that I think are not relevant, but turns out they are. And it's a strength that they ask these questions.
Thanks. So now we have the first question from Bradley Furber. Bradley, would you like to say your question to everybody on your microphone? Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Topic, Hello?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, yeah, so my question, because I have lived around Australia, USA, and Europe, and been involved with startups, pretty much everywhere. From your perspective, what do you think is in the say angel and venture finance markets between Europe and
Okay, Bradley, I think you asked for the differences in the venture capital and angel financing market in Europe versus, I guess, the US.
Yes, this was the question, but sometimes we lose the connection, unfortunately.
So the very interesting question, and difficult to give a short answer. Some bullet points. The capital market structure in the US is very different from the capital market structure in Europe. That means that there is much more money available to venture capital funds, and there's also more angel investors with really deep pockets in the US. That's number one. So there's much more money available looking for companies, which actually is interesting for the companies because you tend to get better valuation and fundraising is easier. There is also a much more established and unified ecosystem in the US, where it's the roles of different players in the industry, business angels, VC investors, board members, audit firms, law firms, supporting structures are clearer defined, and it's a much more unified ecosystem. In Europe, things are different between Luxembourg and Germany, even though we're next door neighbors. Things are different in the UK from France. Also, the legal framework for companies are different everywhere. So it's that has an impact on how concise the ecosystem is. So on top of having less capital, there is a more fragmented ecosystem at the same time.
Okay, thanks. The next one is Luis Belafo. Luis, would you like to say your question on microphone?
Silence 5 seconds. Thanks.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Uli, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very, very, very interesting to have your insights. So my question would be, well, first of all, I'm Luis Bellafon from Penji Aerospace, an early stage space tech company. And first, my question would be, do you agree that actually bootstrapping is the best method to generate cash inflows and develop the company at this very early stage? And do you have any advice or examples of these early stage companies bootstrapping?
Yes, thank you. A very good question. Is bootstrapping the best way to start a company? You know, if you can bootstrap and get the company to first revenues, I believe it's among the most perfect scenarios, if that does not mean you lose too much time. The benefit of bootstrapping is you generate market traction, you prove that you're right with your ideas, that you have paying customers, and that means that you will get much better terms from investors. They take less shares of your company. They're more willing to give you a larger amount of money. They probably want less, they are a bit lighter on the rights and privileges they ask for. So if you raise money for a company that has already generated the first 2 to 5 million in revenues from VCs or business angels, rather than raising money for a zero revenue company, you are definitely in better shape vis-a-vis the investors. The one perspective to not lose out of sight is how much time will you win or lose if you bootstrap the company? And that's actually not a simple question to answer, because some super innovative companies, and I've seen that in the area of space technologies as well, they were so much ahead of their time that it didn't actually make a big difference that they needed 2 more years because they were bootstrapping. But there's other areas, and potentially now would be the time if a company is thinking about creating a small satellite propulsion system or creating a small satellite launch system, where time to market is a bit more of the essence, because there's so many things going on. Everybody is working on something. Now it's more critical to think about your time to market versus 5 years ago. If it took 2 years longer, it was not the end of the world. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Uli. The next one is Pablo Giglino. Pablo, would you like?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, again, thank you very much. It has been a really inspiring talk to me. I was going to ask you something a little bit along the lines before. We have a software company, a big portion of our software it applies to space. And my question is related to VC that invest in space. Are there any specific, do you have any specific view on that? Is a different kind of VC that invest in space, or is just like in any other sector? Thank you very much.
Yeah, another good question is different VCs that invest in space. Well, first and foremost, VCs invest in certain kinds of business models. So if you are a software company, you have software company business models. Either you sell licenses or you have software as a service or whatever, but it's going to be a software industry business model. And you have certain technical challenges and technical assets that are typical for a software company. My recommendation would probably be to look for a VC who is an experienced investor in software. That the software is being applied in the space industry is potentially an extra bonus. And the reason for that is the fact that currently space is fairly en vogue. A lot of people talk about space. There's a lot of talk about new space. It has created a desire on the side of investors to look closer towards space. And even though VC investors are proud about being super smart and always on the leading edge of innovation, also we look for trends. And we like to invest in things that are trending because if we catch a trend early on in its development, we expect that we can make investments at attractive valuations and then benefit from a trend and growing valuations with a trend. So by the time that we exit the company, due to the fact that the market has been in a positive trend, we get very exciting valuations at point of exit. So the fact that space is trending is in your favor. But what denominates the kind of investors that will look at your company is the fact that it's a software business. And the same holds true actually for hardware companies. Investors that only invest in online business models will find it super difficult to invest in a hardware company because they will find it difficult to understand the dynamics of what it means to have cost of goods sold and development cycles and everything related to it. So the question, what kind of investors to look for, is really more about what is my company doing. I mean, if it were a biotech company that primarily thinks about stuff related to human spaceflight, it would probably still be a company that might want to engage with biotech investors.
Thanks, Uli. The next one is Adrian Babis. Adrian, would you like to say your question on the microphone?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Dear Uli, thank you very much for introducing to us the basic perception problems with regards to this. I think it was really helpful. Thank you for that. My question is for you that do you have any experience handling the exit from the perspective of a founder who devoted many years to his vision and mission and building the company, and basically at the exit it's something like passing the torch to a new business owners where the founder is basically not the sole driver of the mission and passing the torch. Do you have any thoughts and experience regarding to this type of exit?
I hated it. So I built and sold a company twice. And in one case, to be going back to serious, in one case it worked really well. Actually, the new owner, they took the business and they made something really nice out of my little baby, quote unquote. And they did not ask me to stay involved, which is actually I found the better solution, because I found it very difficult in the second case to sell the shares of the company, but to stay involved in a managerial role for a certain period of time to allow transition and to ensure continuity with the customers. And I found it difficult because the new owners, rightfully so, they changed a lot of things that they thought they should do different in regards to product strategy, customer engagement strategies, etc. And for me, that was super difficult because that was not how I built the business. That was not the relationship I had built with my customers. And to change that perspective and to adopt the new strategy as my strategy and find it positive, I found super duper difficult. So my conclusion was it's better to have a clear cut and then let the new people run with it and decide whatever they should be doing. But that's a very individual experience on my side. I also have seen in some of the portfolio companies that we sold that actually the management team did really well in the new larger corporate environment. A lot is again, I mean, a lot is depending on what one could summarize as trust. If the acquirer trusts the existing management team to do good things, and they keep enough room for development, then it can work out really well. So it's a super individual thing that can go any direction.
So basically, when you have a portfolio companies and you decide to go for an exit, you can understand the point of view from the founder point of view, maybe the reluctance to give up the shares and everything like that, right?
I fully well understand it and have the fullest sympathy, and that's also why I'm saying every founder needs to really carefully think about it before getting venture capital. Because if you get venture capital, the ultimate goal is to sell the company at one point in time. Let's not kid ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we IPO it, but that is 10% of the cases. So, and if you don't think you want to sell your company, it's better to find other ways to fund it. That's my very personal opinion. I have fullest sympathy that it's difficult for founders. I think it's a great opportunity to get venture capital and really scale the business, and then maybe at one point in time let somebody else take it even further. So there's many reasons why this is a great approach towards building a company. But I have full sympathy for the founders who say, oh, not really. And when we make investments, we spend a lot of time talking with the founders about the fact that there will be an exit strategy. We will push for it. How do you feel about it? How supportive will you be? Because also, let's face it, we can have the most perfect potential acquirer of a company. If the founders don't play game, they can destroy that exit.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you very much for your opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Uli. Unfortunately, the time for this webinar is over. So we'll thank you everybody for joining us. And I'm sure if you have other questions, we can redirect to Uli, and she'll be for sure happy to give you advices.
Yeah, it'll be my pleasure. So any questions you have, send them to Emanuele, and you can then forward them to me.
Perfect. So thank you, everybody. I wish you a very nice end of the day, and see you for the next webinar.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and talk to you soon.
Yes.
Bye now.